Hi, I'm Kylie Anne Neal, founder of Kan Culture, and welcome to Kan Talk Kulture. In this podcast, I sit down with some of Australia's most progressive founders and CEOs to explore the heart of their company cultures, what drives them, what they value, and what it's really like to work for the companies they lead. You'll also find occasional episodes packed with practical HR insights to help you build safer, stronger, and more trusted workplaces. So whether you're a new team member getting to know your workplace, curious about creating remarkable company cultures, or just wanting to know more about implementing HR best practice, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Kan Talk Culture podcast. I'm Kylie Neal, your host, and joining me today is Georgina Walker, who is a people and culture consultant at Kan Culture. Welcome, Georgina.
Thanks, Kylie. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back. So today we are talking about psychosocial risk, and specifically the risk that scale-ups don't see coming. So obviously with a scale-up, you're in growth mode. You're building company, you're building product, you're building team, whatever it might be. Your focus is to scale up. Where I think scale-up organizations that are in excessive growth can get unstuck is not understanding what the psychosocial risks are and what their obligations are. So psychosocial safety has actually been part of safety legislation since 2011. But on the 1st of April 2023, there was let's call it a new phase of what obligations were for businesses. And overall, what the new legislation is saying is that businesses have a requirement to identify and manage risk of a psychological nature through the psychosocial hazards just as much as they do through the physical hazards in a workplace.
Right.
So physical safety, in my view, is a lot of tangible injuries that you can actually physically see. There's a cord on the floor. Let's put it away because that's a
trip hazard.
It's a trip hazard. That's a risk. We can fill out a risk register. We can write an incident report if someone trips over that cord. And we can go through the workplace and really assess and address anything that's physical in nature because we can see it.
The visible stuff.
Yeah. What happens when we look at psychosocial hazards and risks makes it less tangible and a lot more difficult for businesses to manage. Psychosocial risks don't need to be an incident. It is about the steps that the organisation takes to prevent the incidences from occurring. So that's what makes it really tricky. When we look at what psychosocial hazards are, they include things like job demands, low job control, poor support, lack of clarity, poor organisational change management, inadequate reward and recognition, poor organisational justice, traumatic events or material, remote or isolated work. It's a very interesting one.
Goodness.
Poor physical environment, violence and aggression, bullying, harassment, conflict or poor workplace relationships and interactions.
The list goes on.
There is so much in that. And as HR professionals, we see these types of incidences every day. Every day we have conversations of people not having clarity on their role, people feel like they're under pressure because they have too many responsibilities put on them. Remote workers, did COVID do to that? Like there's so many workers who are remote these days in comparison to what they used to be. The bullying, harassment, violence and aggression, those types of workplace behaviours have been part of policy for a very, very long time. So we know that makes sense from a work perspective. But when we bring it back to companies that are scaling up, job demands, poor support. In a company that's scaling, that may be a small business, support looks very different to an organisation that has thousands of employees with many, many foundational teams and support mechanisms around to scaffold each and every team member. When you work in a small organisation or an organisation that's focusing on growth, you often don't get the level of support that you perhaps require. Some people work well in those environments and some don't. But from a psychosocial risk profile, scale-ups are very exposed to a lot of these psychosocial hazards. So how can we educate founders or business owners or team leaders to pay attention of what their responsibilities are with these psychosocial risks? How can we help them understand what their obligations are? You know, most businesses that we work with, one thing is for certain is that they deeply care about their team. So it's not about bad leadership. It's about growth outpacing structure. And legally, intent doesn't remove responsibility, unfortunately. So if the way work is designed creates risk, that risk still needs to be managed.
So when people hear the term psychological risk, they quite often think of, your bullying, your harassment or extreme situations. But in reality, and especially in those scale-ups, it's much quieter. It's the high workloads that never settle. It's the role that keeps, evolving without being reset. It's managers trying to support everyone and all the demands. And the hard thing is that it's not malicious at all. Everyone is well intentioned and everyone is doing their best. But in high pressure, this accumulates. And when it's not named, it shows up later in ways that leaders didn't see. So, people going on stress leave or random resignations and things like that when it's already too late.
Often the resignations, the disengagement, those types of things, if they come out of nowhere, it's a surprise.
And it's too late.
And it's too late. And it's a surprise. Again, it comes back to it's not necessarily because there's bad leadership. It's because the focus of the organisation is on growth, is on product, instead of focus being laid on the compliance and the psychosocial safety of the team. There are some very clear risk factors that apply directly to scale-ups. I think one that you mentioned is the sustained workload pressure. Companies are agile these days. Companies work in sprints, and sprint mode often becomes business as usual. And that time of sprint, and then the actual definition of a sprint is that you sprint and then you stop and pause and then you reevaluate and then you sprint again. Whereas when sprint becomes the norm, it's going from one sprint to the next sprint to the next sprint. And suddenly any opportunity to recover disappears. So that's a big risk for scale-ups. So, and even if people are performing, that risk still exists because the law looks at exposure to risk, not just the outcomes. So again, an incident doesn't have to have occurred for psychosocial risk to be evident within a workplace. Another one is role ambiguity. So when people don't have clarity about what they're accountable for, about what who makes decisions in the organisation for what, or what success looks like, those types of things increase stress.
Mm.
And in scale-ups, roles can change so quickly.
Yeah.
And there is the expectation that you jump in and you do what's required to get the job done.
Wearing multiple hats.
Multiple hats.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult for organisations to establish clarity when it shifts all the time.
Which is the nature of a startup and scale up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Poor support for managers is another recognised psychosocial hazards. And I think in scale-ups in particular, because of the pace of them and when they're in growth, they can put people who have maybe joined the organisation because they have a particular area of product expertise, and then suddenly they're building a team underneath them because they need more resources under that particular expertise. But what they don't equip first-time managers with is support to be able to manage, have emotional intelligence, have the training required to actually lead a team. Those, I really dislike the term, but like the softer skills of being a people manager. And there's also in the psychosocial risks organisational design, which when everything flows through one or two leaders, there's delays, uncertainty and pressure that just like ripples across the business. So regulators are increasingly clear that these are work design issues, not just operational or growing pains. So being able to look, if we talk about how do we mitigate risks, how would we as HR professionals speak to a scale-up when we're like, you've got a psychosocial risk through your organisational design, they would go, huh? And fair enough.
Yeah.
Before 2023, even though the psychosocial hazards were part of safety legislation, I think everyone would have gone, huh?
Not even, your startups and scale-ups, even your larger organisations still have a big question mark around this stuff.
Yes.
Because it is still pretty new in the grand scheme of things. So there's no doubt that there would be question marks for everyone.
Question marks for everyone. And over the last couple of years, I know from a Kan Culture perspective, so legislation changed, I think it was 1st of April 2023. Companies that are scaling up, the main message here is that they need to pay attention to what psychosocial hazards they have within their workplace. There's a requirement for businesses to manage risk, to understand and identify risk, and also to mitigate risk by putting whatever controls they can in their business. The way that we would support that is to ensure that employees are trained in the right areas, with bullying, harassment, discrimination. They're trained on policies that if someone has a new resource that's required, that they scope the role out so that there's job clarity instead of just like, oh yeah, we're just looking for someone who's got good admin skills and we'll put them in an admin role. Roles need to be really scoped out. The organisational structure needs to be updated and shared with the whole team. It needs to be somewhere that's really accessible. The team needs to be brought on the journey of strategic direction, for example, so that there's not that ambiguity. If the company works in sprints, the sprints need to be very clear, and then there needs to be that allowance for recovery and recuperation. From businesses also, to mitigate their psychosocial hazards and risks, EAP just doesn't cut it anymore from a wellness perspective. So being able to be in tune with what the requirements are for their employees to make sure that they are sustainably managing the well-being of their employees. It's not just about having a counsellor available to them. It's much broader than that. It might be financial health or, light legal representation or whatever it looks like. The offerings are so many offering these days, but and it might be, Joe's been in the office for 10 hours every day for the last week. Okay, well, we need to have a word with Joe to make sure that she's not overburdening herself with work and that she's not burning herself out.
And, keeping an eye out. And in reality, an employee is not going to say to you, I'm experiencing a psychosocial risk. They're going to be saying things like, I'm tired all the time.
Yes.
Or I don't know what's expected of me, because their role is changing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So first-time managers do feel this very deeply as well. You kind of touched on before, but they're trying to do the right thing by their team, still delivering in their role, still learning, and they're absorbing all the emotional labour that they were never actually trained for. And founders and new business owners, feel it as well. They become the pressure point for the team.
Yes.
And teams don't want to add to their load, so they might hold things back and not express how they're really feeling, or, if the rest of the team is go, 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 they feel like they have to kind of be on that same bandwagon. And founders especially, they want growth, so they just push themselves to the limit.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it sets a bit of a tone for the team.
Yes.
So just pausing and having a think about that as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And, from a regulator's perspective, the regulators aren't asking a question of, did someone complain? They're asking what systems were in place, how were workloads managed, how were managers supported. And that's a shift that scale-ups need to be really aware of. It comes back to what we were talking about in the last episode of, don't wait to engage HR, because these are some things that are the risks can be proactively mitigated. There can be proactive action from an organisation if they just understand what they need.
Yeah.
Founders and business owners and leaders don't necessarily understand what they need.
No.
Whereas we can quite easily put things in place so that they are compliant, so that they are meeting the compliance standards of psychosocial.
Yes, and we're not there to, put red tape around the organisation and slow down the growth of that business, but it's more about helping founders understand where the pressure sits, helping them understand that they need to check in regularly with their team, make sure everyone has their role, or clarify their role, and make sure that the managers aren't taking all the load.
Yes. The responsibility, I think, the psychosocial factors has been a bit of a big deal for organisations over the last couple of years, but I actually feel going forward the legislation is going to keep changing in this area. They're not only like really intangible, but I remember when the psychosocial hazards, those 14 items were first introduced, and everyone was like, how do we actually accommodate for these? And the advice from a couple of lawyers that I spoke to at the time was always, they've changed the legislation, but we need to wait for some case law to see what kind of cases are coming up to the courts and, what kind of complaints are being raised to Safe Work Australia. And that's when these 14 points are going to be formed more, and we'll be able to get more guidance from a regulatory perspective as to how we adhere to them. So it is a bit of a journey, I think. Businesses can do the best that they can do. even for us with the knowledge that we have, we can absolutely make sure that the right compliance mechanisms are put in place and that they are addressing psychosocial. But I think this is an area that's going to be changing for many years to come.
Yes, I think so too.
Yeah. Constant. So if you are a scale-up business owner or leader, or you have a friend that is a founder or a business owner, please caution them about the importance of focusing on psychosocial hazards within their workplace. Let them know that it is that proactive steps that they need to address before an actual incident occurs, because that's what the regulators care about. That's what the legislation cares about. So reach out to Kan Culture. You can email us at hello@canculture.com and we can discuss it further, and we're happy to help. Thank you for joining me, Georgina.
Thanks, Kylie.
Thank you.
Next time.
See you next time. Thanks for joining me on Kan Talk Culture. I'm Kylie Anne Neal. I hope today's episode gave you a clearer view into the values driving your workplace, or sparked new ideas about building a remarkable company culture. If you're a founder or CEO interested in sharing your culture story, or if you're looking to build a safer, stronger, and more trusted workplace, let's connect. Visit canculture.com. That's KANKULTURE.com to learn more. Please hit that subscribe button to hear more real conversations with founders and CEOs and hands-on episodes full of people-first culture advice. I look forward to connecting with you on our next episode.